Hi everyone, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Change Challenge, where we'll be looking at different layers of change, mind, body, spirit, how it plays out in our personal lives, in our professional lives, in society and the world around us. And just the value of being able to transition and move and be dynamic in that way. It's my privilege to introduce you to my co-panelists. We'll begin with Archana Das, who's the head of Ascent Foundation. She does a lot of work with entrepreneurs, business people, the community of industry at large, and how they cope with well-being, mental health, and change at large. Smita Barua, who's a respected de-addictions specialist therapist based in Delhi. She had a flourishing private practice in Singapore, and very glad to have her perspective on resilience training, why we get stuck and are unable to change out of certain habit patterns. Happy to introduce Nawaz. Nawaz Modi Singhania, of course, all of you would know, is a body and fitness expert. She's somebody who looks at change very tangibly in terms of how the body resists it and adapts to it, and also in a very integrated way, very thoughtfully and spiritually as well. So I'm very keen on hearing her perspective. And of course, Niranjan, who's award-winning lyricist, screenwriter, filmmaker, producer, composer, talk show host, um, uh, best known for Kal Ho Na Ho. Arguably, everybody has their favorite with I find Kal Ho Na Ho my favorite and most relevant to change, which is why I mentioned it, but of course his latest baby also. So I'd be really looking forward to everybody's views on the change challenge. And why is it a challenge right now, right? Because we've come through this period of the pandemic where things are just, all our lives have been upturned in some way or the other, however big or small, professionally or personally. So let's sort of begin with defining what the challenge is for us in each of our lives. So, Archana, would you like to begin? I know you do a lot of work with the business community, entrepreneurs, industry, uh, and of course, after health, right now, the biggest hit that we've taken as a community and society, as a nation, is the economy. So, what is the biggest challenge for change right
Right, right. So we work with entrepreneurs who are growth stage, not necessarily startups. So these are organizations which have been in existence for some time, making a certain money, and what we typically call SMEs and MSMEs organization. While they're going about, focusing on growth and transformation in their own organization, here comes pandemic, and now they are there only for survival. Right, overnight, world changes for them, but not only changes for them personally, but changes for the livelihoods that they are responsible for as well. So there is change in business model, there needs to be change in the markets that they're going to, there needs to be change in people, that they are with them, to let them go or to keep them. Those were all the challenges, because these are never easy things to handle for an entrepreneur. They're so committed, and to and in their own self, right? Then there's this whole question of this change, questioning their own self worth, their own identity. And this whole fear of failure takes a huge toll on mental health. Thankfully, this is a conversation in our cohort of 750 entrepreneurs that we have across India, which is we are a not for profit. Thankfully, this conversation started in 2019, where we did the first ever study on the mental health for entrepreneurs specifically. The reason why we started doing it is also because there was nothing there in the Indian context. There was everything from Silicon Valley, everything, especially where the failures are celebrated in our country, failures are not. And as entrepreneurs, they can't afford to fail, whether you're a family managed or a first generation. So
now?
that
I get what
study
you
was
mean
done.
in terms of also culturally locating it and looking at our society and culture and how we sort of respond to change.
Right,
Yeah, that's
right.
what you
And
said.
right. And always the optic illusion is always to come out as this strong person who's carrying everything on their shoulder, right? There is no space for vulnerability. There is no space to have help. There's always that loneliness when it comes to entrepreneurs' journey.
I'm going to toss that point actually to Niranjan right now because he's somebody who's looked at this sort of vulnerability and sort of captured it really sensitively in his music, in his work, in his screenwriting a number of times over the screen. Niranjan, looking at popular culture, Indian society, what do you make, and especially in the context right now of the film industry, which over the past 1.5 years has been hit with so much change and so brutally. What do you think where the challenge for change is? Do you think that we are not vulnerable enough as a society?
Uh, I think we've been on this path for several years now, actually, Gayatri. The fact that, change has been, like, for instance, if you see my generation, when we grew up, from the time I was born till I was about, say, 20, in the 2 decades, the change was very slow. We started off with the radio, and the maximum we reached was television. Whereas from the time I've been 20 to now 50, in the last 30 years, we have jumped through many hoops of technological, landmarks, uh, human landmarks in all kinds. So, in that sense, I think we've been changing quite rapidly for the last 30 years. I would definitely think so in many ways. But in the process, what happens is there's all the changes like we discussed earlier also, Gayatri, change is two pronged. One is a change that happens around you, and one is a change that happens within you.
So
So
well
when you
said.
are rapidly running about chasing the change that is happening outside of you, sometimes I think you neglect or a parts of you inside are not paid enough attention to. I think this pandemic has shifted focus from the outside change to the inside change in human beings. Like
That's
suddenly everything stopped, suddenly everything outside just came to a halt, and you had no option but to focus on areas within yourself that may have needed change. And I think that's what we are grappling with now. Of course, many of us have been on the journey of introspection or have been on the journey of the internal changes, which is why we are slightly better equipped than others who have probably not done that. So I think we are just grappling with that mostly,
with
what we've
the
been
inner
doing for a
workings.
very,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Very well said. Smita, I see you nodding in agreement over there. Do you find, this world of the inner change is entirely your world, and what you sort of help people who are struggling with? What do you feel that these past few months of the pandemic have sort of thrown up in terms of challenges, and has it made it any harder or even easier, probably? Mute,
You're on mute, Smita, you're on mute.
mute.
Can you hear me now? I
Yes.
was
Yeah.
nodding when Niranjan was speaking because his distinction between the inner change and the change that's happening all around you is very pertinent, and it especially applies to my work. As you know, I'm a therapist, and the initial bit of the pandemic threw me off because in my line of work, I like to be with people. When you're face to face with an individual, the energy that they give off is a different kind, and I like to watch the people's body language. I like to watch everything from what they're wearing, what their makeup is like, how they're responding to the conversation. And unfortunately, it's not that easy to do the same thing online. So for me, it meant breaking a mental barrier to start online sessions. And having done that, I have to say my adaptability to this particular change has been a win-win situation for me because it's opened out a whole new world. As far as my clients are concerned, I am seeing a lot of not expected, things that I didn't expect and they didn't expect.
प्रमोट
For
करती है।
instance,
हाल ही में उन्होंने इंस्टाग्राम
um, yeah. For instance, the fact that women, for instance, are the most vulnerable, in my opinion, in this whole pandemic situation because they're stuck at home. Women have always traditionally had to juggle roles, but that is now magnified because their
Hmm.
work is longer. The
Hmm.
demands of the family are always there, and she's always on call. So I know women who get maybe 6 hours of sleep, and from the time they wake up, they're on duty because they have to
Hmm.
juggle that work and home balance. The other scary part that I see with women is for the first time in their lives, they are locked in with their tormentors, women in abusive relationships, women in bad marriages. They're stuck
yeah,
in a situation where they can't escape, and that's terrifying.
yeah,
Then I see children who are traumatized because you put them in a situation where not everybody, remember, has access to a computer or to fancy technology. They're having to
yeah,
study and to engage in a situation where they don't understand the teachers, they don't have the peer, referrals. They're isolated, they're stuck at home with families where there might be generation gap, where there are space issues. So that's leading to anxiety, depression, stress, lack of motivation. So we've seen this whole gamut of things that are blowing up. Fortunately, some homes and some communities are now coming to terms with this new dynamics, and they're taking redressal measures. For instance, there are schools who are reaching out to me and saying, will you have workshops for children or for their teachers? Because remember, even for teachers, it's a different thing. But it's a slow process. And I've said this before and I repeat, right now we're somehow coping with this pandemic, gritting our teeth and just marching ahead. But at some point, we will see severe cases of PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress.
yeah,
Because when you're in situations of crisis, the human instinct is to just survive. It's only when you sit down and you process what's happened is when all the emotions come tumbling in.
yeah, yeah. That's extremely beautifully put, Smita. Thank you so much. I'm going to toss that to Nawaz now because it's so interesting that Niranjan and what Niranjan said and Smita sort of also took forward is this concept of internal as well as external change leading into the actual physical stresses that exist in within our environments, and the highest toll of that seems to be physically, tangibly on the body, whether it's an abusive environment or a toxic environment, or, and I know Nawaz, you've spoken several times before of, the struggle with cancer of people within your family or around you, and the consciousness that that has brought to your understanding of the human body and its capacity to take these sort of long-term challenges. How do you feel that we have um, understood what the body needs in these past few months?
Well, actually, to flip this around slightly differently, Gayatri, firstly, to figure what really is the impact of what's going on out here on the body itself. There are a million and one things, starting with what Smita said right now being the most important, that, that there's a huge mental, emotional, psychological impact that's going to go on way
Yeah,
beyond any pandemic or endemic is going to go on, and what kind of society we are going to end up stuck with, and how that's going to play out is a scary thought, and is going to keep the clinics very full for very long.
yeah,
The nervous system gets hugely impacted. There's this flight and fight reaction. There's with all the strains and nervousness and tension and insecurity and bitterness and hate and everything, which legitimately has been coming in since March 2020, and has not been resolved. On the body front of it, since that's precisely what I'm here for, I work with people who are constantly having major neck, shoulder, upper back problems. The body stores a lot of stress out there. You're working on computers, you're sitting hunched up all day, you are physically, emotionally stressed. It is held in that region.
yeah,
That can also be with a lot of people. It's stored in the mid and the lower back, added to the fact that that little bit of extra weight is kind of up right now,
yeah,
which doesn't do the back many favors, especially when the core right now is not as strong as it used to be. You don't have access to your gyms, and your normal movement is restricted, limited. Muscles are weakened, fat is being gained. We do have a little bit of emotional eating, if not more, if not heavier sort of addictions. And then that really impacts everything else. Many of us ourselves have found that, okay, my eyes get impacted if I'm
yeah,
stressed or I've not slept enough. The hearing even gets impacted. The skin, the nails, the hair, we're not able to get to our parlors, we're not able to get to our best treatments, we're not able to even just get the kind of undisturbed sleep that we used to before.
Yeah.
water, nutrition, etc., all suffering. Additionally, the hands, the feet can end up, being very tense, clenched, have all sorts of issues which one might not have imagined previously. Of course, when you're that indoors, muscles start weakening, and they start weakening very quickly. They atrophy very quickly.
Hmm.
Um, Bones actually suffer, joints actually suffer. One place where we manage to hold on to a lot of tension and stress is the gut. So
Okay.
the digestive system takes a huge hit there as well. Headaches are not uncommon. Respiratory issues, initially shallow breathing leading to panic breath, panic attacks are not
Yeah.
uncommon. Um, with the lack of confidence, the voice, stammering, etc., is not uncommon. Insomnia, other things, nerve related and tension related, being jaw clenching and teeth grinding, not only in our sleep, but even in our waking hours.
So basically,
Bad.
what you're pointing out is that this change that impacts us is functioning at a very, very microcosmic level in these sort of cues that we're missing, and
Totally.
that affect not just, so we think that change is this one thing that has happened to us. The pandemic has happened, maybe our work has been affected, but it's there is this sort of domino effect at a very, very microcosmic level that becomes difficult for us to handle. And I think what both of you have sort of also pointed out, Nawaz and Smita, is this need to look to oneself when the external structures are either dangerous for us, harmful for us, or not reliable anymore. Um, Archana, is that something I can toss back to you? Are there lessons in this of self-reliance, of looking to one's own resources?
I just sometimes feel that that whole concept of self-love, self-reliant, care becomes a little more Americanized in the sense that if there's going to be so much pressure on the entrepreneur to change
Hmm.
everything, it just breaks the person. So I think while there is internal and external looking, and for internal, they found their own coping mechanisms, whether it's exercising, meditation, journaling. They're always also looking for external help as well, whether it's finding the right mentors, coaches, peer support groups. So I think it's a
Hmm.
balance of both, and the ecosystem should be conducive for the entrepreneur to function. Too much pressure on the entrepreneur to become more self-reliant and doing everything on their own takes a toll on their mental health for sure.
Okay. Okay. Smita, what do you feel about this whole self-reliance issue being Americanized and not really part of us culturally?
Actually, I disagree. More than self-reliance, I would like to use the word resilient.
Hmm.
Resilience basically means that no matter what life throws at you, you have the elasticity and the ability and the inner resources to bounce back and stand on your own feet. Of course, we're humans, right? So we take the first hit, we stagger for a bit, and then we find our own feet. And in this context, actually, if we have time, I'd like to go back on, what our own traditions say. We're so focused on what the West is saying that sometimes in times of stress, we forget our own traditions. For instance, I don't know how many of you have read the Gita, but the basic essence of the Gita is do your duty, don't worry about the result. What is it
Hmm.
actually saying? That the only thing that you can control is the here and the now. You take one step at a time, keep doing your job, because you can't really control what even lies await 5 minutes later, forget about 5 years later.
Absolutely.
So you can
Absolutely.
focus on the here and now and then let the world unravel as it will. And the world is inherently chaotic. You can't try and
The
control that.
problem, Smita, is the world is unraveling beneath our feet. And, we are like, we have never had to focus on the now as much as ever before.
I would disagree there, Gayatri, because if you think about it, in many ways, we are the blessed generation. We get so caught up in the pandemic right now that we forgot what our ancestors have had to face with. In living memory, we had two world wars, we had famines, we had the Spanish flu, and they didn't have the technology or the communications that we do have now.
Medical
So I think in
advances.
moments like this, gratitude and perspective is important.
Yeah, so also I can see that you're a big believer in that resilience, seeing what we have, working with what we have.
Yes.
Now, isn't that also an essentially tangible, physical sort of almost philosophy of the body? To sort of resilience is so important in strength training, in understanding what your body needs. How do you think that we can sort of focus on that and improve that?
So, take I believe that you don't have anybody else to rely on these days. You can't rely on your docs. You don't want to get out to a hospital or a clinic or any diagnostic center. That's a heart attack in itself. My God. So what do you have? What are you left with? Rely on yourself, which is what we've always been talking about. That good health really is your birthright. And if we earlier thought of, exercise or cardiorespiratory fitness is okay, a bit of a luxury, hell no. Now it's very much a necessity. Your life very much depends upon it. So we found, of course, new ways during the pandemic of having our online classes and online personal trainings, etc., which gives you everything that you get outside with a few adaptations because you don't have the equipment that you used to have. You have many household items that you adapt and use and get on with it. And
Yeah.
no, happy hormones are released in the brain, your serotonins and dopamines and endorphins, etc., your feel good hormones. And what's there not to feel good about when the body is coming back into shape? You're regaining your strength, losing weight, regaining your flexibility, etc. So it's really all good. I mean, you do what you can, and that's good enough.
Yeah. I think that's an important point you've brought up in Smita also about this gratitude and perspective and seeing what we have and using those resources, which Archana is a very entrepreneurial, we're called a Jugaad society for a reason.
Yeah, yeah.
And do you see that? And also, do you make a distinction in the community that you work with between men and women and the way in which we use resources and are able to uh, have that perspective for what we have and our ability to build on.
Sorry, could you repeat that? I couldn't hear you.
I said, do you sort of make that distinction in the community that you work with, the business community, the entrepreneurial community, of the difference between men and women, the way their perspective, the way they use resources?
Right, right. So male and women entrepreneurs, is that what we're talking about,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So yes, so that's very interesting. I must tell you that in our cohort also the number of women entrepreneurs have actually dropped during pandemic because not only were they running businesses, now they're they have to be at home full time as well. So that's a little bit of a problem with the male and the women entrepreneur there. But studies have actually shown that women are more resilient to changes and come up even if you're an entrepreneur or not. So in terms of resources, I think the male entrepreneurs end up using resources much more effectively than female
Hmm.
entrepreneurs for sure.
Okay. Hi Niranjan. I think you've done a kal ho na ho on us. Oh, there you are. You're back again.
No, no,
Uh,
I've been able to see y'all and hear y'all throughout. I don't know why y'all couldn't see me.
you're like the invisible, hand behind the this little show that we have. What do you feel is the difference between the way do men respond differently, do women respond differently? Do we have resilience built into us culturally? What is your take as an observer of the society?
I honestly don't like to make the distinction between a man and a woman. And I really, I mean, I have a lot of friends who are women and men. I've seen that this has affected everybody uniformly. I mean, not in the same ways or maybe not in the same directions, but it has impacted all of us equally. I mean, if there is trauma, it's equal trauma. If there is
Yeah.
comfort, there's equal comfort. If the trying is as hard for a man as it is for a woman, especially with these kind of spaces which are more internal,
Okay.
where there is depression, where there is, because that doesn't have really gender specific roles. It's a mind grappling with the issues. So whether it's a man or a woman, as far as the society and culturally is concerned, I think in a way, I mean, much as I've cursed the pandemic and been really, angry about the way everything has panned out,
Yeah.
on a very subliminal way, I'm quite glad it happened also because I think a large part of me I discovered during this phase, which I think if things were going on well enough, I may not have. Well, the process was not really comfortable. It was not convenient. It was quite traumatic. But having said that, after like 1.5 years of going through this, when I look back, I feel there's a large part about myself that I've understood. And even for someone who's so, especially for someone who's so resistant to change like I am, I don't like
Mm-hmm.
change at all. Right from my childhood, I've always fought change. I have always fought for status quo. And this space has really thrown everything to the winds, and all my checks and balances have really been blown away with this situation. And when I look back after a year and a half, I just realized that, yeah, I did walk through this path kicking and screaming, but I had to go through it because that's one of the biggest learnings, actually, if you ask me, is that change is inevitable. And we
Yeah.
are all constantly trying to find ways and means to mitigate those changes for us, or the impact that the change that has on us, especially when they are not conducive to what we want. We want to change that. But I think my realization through this process has been that that's not going to be possible. No matter how clever you are, no matter how resourceful you are, no matter how rich you are, no matter how famous you are, change is not something that is going to stop for you, for the world, for your surrounding, for just everything at large. So ultimately, I think in a way, I'm glad that this has happened even to a culture like ours, because our culture is also, you know, it's only recently that to each his own has been introduced into our culture. Self
Yeah.
love, look after yourself first before you look. This is a recent phenomenon for our culture, because
Yeah.
for us
Yeah.
as Indians especially, we are always surrounded by family. We are always taught to put the interests of your immediate loved ones over yours. Even when
Yeah.
you're in an office, a colleague who's going through suffering, well, you take on their share of work. If a boss is a boss, then you sort of bow your head to everything that is. So it's a culture that has always taught us to put others before ourselves. It's a new
To
introduction
support.
for us, where we are talking about self-love, where we're talking about what we are going through, where we're saying it's okay to say no. I mean, throughout my childhood, it was not okay to say no. It was
Absolutely.
not okay to say that. And today it's become like an anthem that it's okay to say no. Everybody from Instagram to big doctors, and everybody is saying the same thing to you. So it's a
Everybody
change that
feels.
we are all grappling, and I think even I'm grappling with that. And I do
Yeah.
find great convenience in saying no now. When I look back, I feel, oh, it's not as bad as I thought it would be. So I think we are all in different phases of that same journey. So it'll be interesting to see how it turns out as a society.
Thank you. That's such a mature and sensitive sort of perspective, especially given the immense loss that you've suffered this past year, and I'm deeply sorry for your
Yeah.
loss.
Thank
But
you.
thank you for that
Thank you.
perspective. It really comes from the depth of pain, and I can see Smita there, agreeing, because we were discussing something similar just a couple of days ago, she was, commenting on how culturally we are not a society that cannot adapt to change. We can, for exactly the same reasons that Niranjana said. Smita, would you like to make a point?
Yeah, in fact, Gayatri and I was speaking the other day, and she said, as a society, do you think we can adapt? And I said, I think we've adapted beautifully, because what Niranjan says is true. Because I cannot tell you the amount of time and effort I have to spend with each client, no matter what trouble they come with. Eventually, we end up working on learning to say no and drawing boundaries, because our society teaches us, as you said, that you have to put the other person first, and when you stand up for yourself, it's seen as something that's selfish. And that needs
Yeah.
to change, because there's a difference between drawing boundaries for yourself and then giving to others. You can't give from an empty well, is what I tell them. But
Yeah.
having said that, let's not throw out all our society norms, because I do believe we went through a horrific pandemic. I mean, it was a nightmare, and the only reason we are still standing today, despite all our infrastructure issue, despite all our other problems, is because I think our social capital is very strong.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
had strangers, you had extended family pull in, when people are down in the dumps, and that is a phenomena that is not trivial. So
Yeah.
yes, it's a double-edged sword.
Beautifully said. Archana, do you find that that is something that kicks in even at the level of the kind of because what you're dealing about essentially with, even when we're talking about individual mental health triggers, stresses, and the impacts, is you are essentially looking at a community, right? And
Yeah.
how the individual is able to find their support system within that community. So,
Yes.
where do you find that that's there? Is it something that needs to be inculcated?
Yeah. So as entrepreneurs, they are expected to be self-driven and resilient. And grittiness all is a definition of entrepreneurship. They go beyond whether it's family managed or first generation. They're starting on their own. People are going to question, and they're probably waiting for you to fail to say, I told you so. Or if it's a family business, then you have a legacy to carry forward. So there's a stress a lot on that, and the loneliness is a part of their
Yeah,
entire existence, right? Friends, families, irrespective of having that support system, it's not something that they go back to rely on time and again. Then they're looking
yeah,
at support system outside,
yeah,
which is like the peer support groups or mentoring mentors that they can find, therapist if they're looking at that help as well. So these are some things that they have now started relying on. I now have
oh,
a 25-year-old entrepreneur coming up to me and saying, I'm a big advocate of therapy. I must tell you that therapy has changed my life. It has actually made me, aware, accept, and take action to things in my life. And for a 25-year-old entrepreneur to come and say that to a 50-year-old sitting there is actually changing mindsets, in a lot of ways positively, and destigmatizing it, especially in our cohort community, that we're putting a lot of effort to do that as well.
oh. Nawaz, do you find that, when we think of ourselves as individuals, as bodies in the larger community, do you think that what is the way that we need to integrate who we are within the larger community in a way that we get support?
So I'm a strong believer of you have to put yourself first amongst equals. You can't be putting, as a female especially, you can't be putting your kids and your in-laws and your husband and your father and your everybody before you, even in a selfish way for them, because if you are there in their support, you can't possibly be if you've fallen apart at the seams. So yeah, it's so important, and it's so important to seek that help that we all need. It's not even in these times. I mean, we do need to talk to somebody we trust. We do need to, take better care of ourselves. We do need to put more stress on just minding our stress and techniques of how to release all of that.
Yeah,
I think it's hugely important, and I would like to also question, perhaps this is for Smita, that these days you see so many self-propounded mental health specialists.
Yeah,
Everybody
totally.
seems to be a mental health specialist. And
Yes.
some of them are known well to me, and I know that they have very, very severe psychosis themselves.
Yes.
oh
And
God,
Yes.
you wonder, what the is that all about? I mean, what? How can this even be? And how is this fair to society? And how are these issues not called out?
yeah, yeah. Nata, would you like to?
I agree. No, of course, it's switching the topic completely. But
Yeah,
because she asked a specific question, yes, I do agree that there are problems in India. We don't have enough trained professionals. And secondly, this field is not regulated. For instance, there are things that I see happen here where if I did the same thing in Singapore, I'd lose my license, right?
yeah,
But it's literally like the Wild West. So the only thing I can tell clients is when you choose therapy, it is a very intense work. And if that therapist is really good, it's like doing open heart surgery. So
yeah,
you have to be damn sure that you find somebody who's competent and who can honor your trust. And for that, you have to do your due diligence because, like in any other field, you have quacks, you have unethical people, and then you have the kosher ones. And unfortunately, we are in a mental health in India is a relatively new field, especially for counselors. And
yeah,
you just have to do your own research like you would for any other medical specialist that you go to.
yeah.
Right. I'd like
Thank
to
you,
add there,
Gayatri.
Gayatri, that we have a curated list of mental health practitioners for our ecosystem as well. And they've
Yeah,
completely been crowdsourced by our members who have used these therapists. So they come with a
Very
huge
important.
validation and reference checks there.
Okay. So I think that's a great point that you raised, Nawaz, also because when we're looking at the individual within the community context, looking for support, turning inwards, balancing our internal, adaptability, resilience to change, along with the external in a culturally relevant context and environment. As you sort of said, it needs to happen in a way that is balanced, that is correct, that is supportive, and that is not just down to quackery and whim. So, I will close. I think this has been a really invigorating discussion. One key maybe tip from each of you on the best way to cope with change before we go. Smita, would you like to start?
The first thing that I'd like to say is to accept that change is a reality. I know it's hard. I am again a status quo person left to myself. But the fact is, change is the only constant. Your bodies are changing, your opinions are changing, the circumstances around you are changing, your roles within the family and outside in the society, that is changing. So you can either fight it or you can go with the flow. In my experience, when you accept something, it just makes the fight that much easier. And then you look for steps on how to deal with the other stuff that's happening around you. So that's one
Accept
tip.
and accept, and then sort of make your part. Archana?
Yeah.
I'll take from what Smita said, accept, not be in denial about the changes which is happening within and outside. Build, update yourself, bring in a lot more awareness to the situation. So read up, talk to people, all of that. And third is, of course, take action as well. To make those changes and adapt to those changes as well. Because I have always found change in my life, like I was mentioning, as a army kid moving around all the time in different areas. I have always found change personally very evolving journey for myself.
Wonderfully evolving journey. Nawaz, your take?
Yeah. So you've heard it from them. I'm not going to repeat it. But I'd like to add on to say that I think a huge change for us has been and really ought to be to realize that earlier we might have been very tolerant of a lot of people and a lot of things because we just were. And now
Yeah.
we've all changed in the sense that we've become a lot more quality conscious about who we want to spend our time with, who we will give our energy to, and about cutting the rubbish out of our life. And maybe that actually, on some level, increases mental issues because those who have them feel more alone and feel more slighted and feel more out of the fray. But I think that's such an important thing to not let that one rotten apple spoil the barrel and just cut the nonsense out and realize that we've been given a new lease of life, make very good use of it.
So also accept change and want the kind of good
make
change
the
that you want
make
to
the
see.
right change some of the people in your life. Yes.
Yeah, very,
Yes.
very important.
Yeah.
Niranjan, your
I
position on
think all things accepted that change is inevitable and all that, and while that takes a long time, I think people should focus on the process. I think the process cannot be standardized. It cannot be equal for everybody. Everybody will have a different process of coping with change, adjusting to change, understanding change. And from my own experience, I've understood that there's a whole lot of things that seems perfectly logical to the whole world, but it doesn't make
yeah.
sense to me at all. And that is the part that I needed to work on. And for that, I had to really figure out my own process. Yes, there
Yeah.
will be help with healers, there will be help with psychiatrists, counselors, meditation, breathing, and all that. But how much of which needs to be used when is a process that you have to define for yourself. And
Your
that
own.
process is something that people need to study. It's a long process because there is no handbook for it. You have to do it someday, fall apart, wake up, then say, okay, this was not working, let me try it this way. And it's a long process. It's taken me literally, I mean, 7 years now to
Hmm.
reach this space where I can speak the way I'm speaking about change. It's a 7, 8 year process. And initially, when I began, I just thought that it was a never-ending process, and it is a never-ending process. But I think you start seeing results after a few years, and that really encourages you. So I would say that people should really focus on the process that helps them the most.
Yeah, sort of own your change, make it your own, and
Yeah.
define your own path given what the solutions and paths are available to you. Beautifully
Yeah.
said. So I'm going to wrap with that. My simple take on change is that own your change before it owns you. and it's painful, but I think at some point we start beginning to enjoy the pain, of change, and that's when we begin to allow it to change us and transform with the transformation. So thank
I'm
you so
glad you're
much.
saying, I'm glad, Gayatri, you're saying that we learn to love it because I've still not reached the stage where I love it. Right now, I'm just living with it like a roommate in a house.
Oh
Yeah.
gosh. I hope you'll have
And
a
rent
beer
free, I
together,
must
have a
add.
glass of
Yeah, yes, I'm
wine.
ready.
Okay, yes. Well, let's not deny that it's painful. It is painful, but we kind of, sort of adapt and
Yeah,
become friends with our enemies as such.
yes.
Thank you so much for coming. This has been
Thank
such a
you.
fun and engaging and enlightening